Hi, this is Dr. Sander. Welcome back. Today we are going to explore the musical concept of melody. Now, whether you sing in the choir or you don't sing in the choir, whether you have perfect pitch or you can't tell one note from the other, everybody seems to recognize and appreciate a good melody. But what is melody? And for that matter, what makes one good? Well, unfortunately, online definitions don't really help us all that much. For example, one says that melody is the outcome of a succession of notes, whatever that means. Another says that melody is a sequence of single notes that is musically satisfying. Well, that may be true, but it really doesn't get us to the heart of the matter. Yet one other definition says that melody is the principal part of harmonized music. Again, that could be true, but I think some chant scholars would probably differ with that definition. For our purposes, it's less important on how we define melody and more important that we recognize melody, and even more important that we see what goes into a good melody and how the Orthodox church music that we sing harmonizes particular melodies. I want to start off by looking at a chant drawn from the Znameny chant tradition of Russia, and this is the Milost Mira, or Mercy of Peace. And when we look at this melody, we can see that it primarily moves in what we call stepwise motion. That is, if we were to think of each pitch being a stair on a staircase, there's no time at which you're stepping over a stair, whether you're going up or down. Now, in music, we call this conjunct motion, and we find this mostly drawn from the chant tradition, which we know constitutes the core of our aesthetic, our melodic aesthetic. And we find in our melodies the lines move primarily, but not always, in conjunct motion. It's easy to sing, and it's easy for the ear to follow. Now, when we look at music that lies outside of the Orthodox choral tradition, maybe instrumental music or operatic vocal music, we find that it doesn't always follow that same kind of conjunct motion that we just heard. In fact, it combines what we call disjunct motion with conjunct motion. So if we look at this piece, this is an instrumental piece by the composer Hummel from his trumpet concerto. We can see that Hummel here combines a fair amount of disjunct motion with conjunct motion. And it's this contrast that gives the melody here an acrobatic feel, which is not necessarily suitable for church music, but exciting nonetheless. Not exactly a cherubic hymn, is it? But at least it gives us some perspective now of the different kinds of melodies and how our church melodies tend to be predominantly conjunct in nature. So now I want to take a look at some Orthodox church melodies and see what makes a good melody in our church music. And I'd like to start with perhaps the most well-known of all melodies of the all-night vigil, the Bless the Lord, O my soul, from the Vesperal Psalm, the so-called Greek chant version of this. And when we look at it, we have to wonder what makes this melody so memorable. Why have so many composers decided to set this melody and harmonize it in various ways? Well, we can see that it is primarily in conjunct motion, with just a little bit of a skip here at the end. But also, we can see that in the key of F major, it begins and ends on the starting note, the tonic note of F, which we would expect. But if you look at the shape and how the voice moves, it has a beautiful shape to it. But more importantly, it has a high point, something we call in music the zenith of the melodic line. Now, if we look at theory textbooks and books on writing melodies, books on counterpoint, They often tell us that good melodies have this high point or zenith. But the word zenith doesn't simply mean high point. It means something much more. It actually means the point at which something is the most powerful. And that's certainly true of this melody. We see that this point, the zenith, is the culmination of everything that came before. So we begin on the note F, and through conjunct motion proceed up to this high point, the zenith, where the melody takes on the most power, and then it proceeds back down, dissipating that energy to the tonic F at the end. So just to review, melodies in Orthodox church music, those that stand out in our mind as good melodies, they tend to have a predominance of conjunct motion as opposed to disjunct motion or skipping. And they also tend to have a zenith or high point somewhere in the interior of the phrase. Now that's not every single melody, obviously, but when we look at those melodies that most influence us, the majority of them share both of these characteristics. Any good composer will tell you that just writing a good melody is not the end of the story. A good composer must take a melody, the inherent characteristics that make that melody strong, and expand it. So one of the things that we talk about in reference to melody is the idea of the motivic element within a melodic figure. Theory textbooks often use that word motive to describe the smallest identifiable musical idea. Often they'll refer to Beethoven's Fifth, for example, the motivic element of Beethoven's Fifth, as being a good example of a motive. In Orthodox music, we also find motives, but they don't come about the same way they do in the music of Beethoven. In Orthodoxy, composers tend to draw motivic ideas out of the text that's being set. A good example of this is in the Trisagion, or Holy God of the Divine Liturgy. Let's take a look at the setting by the composer Azaev. Now, understandably, we find here a three-part division of this textual material into three distinct phrases. And each of these phrases begins with the same five-note motivic idea. And this would make sense because we're beginning each phrase with the word holy. But if we look at the second part of each phrase, we can see that something else is at work here. We begin the same way with conjunct motion. In the first phrase, we lead that up to the zenith on the note A, or the high point on the note A, and then back down. The second phrase begins the same way, hits that same A note that was the high note from the previous phrase, but then extends beyond by one step to the B, creating a new zenith, a new high point. And then in the third phrase, this happens again. We begin the same way. We go up to the A, which was the phrase 1 high point, to the B, which was the phrase 2 high point, and then beyond it once more to the C, which now is the high point for all three phrases. What a beautifully simple composition this is. But its value is not that it's simple. Its value is that the composer has taken some of the materials that we've talked about here, motivic connection, the zenith, the high point, the conjunct motion, and has extracted the meaning of the text, the Holy God text that is part of the Trisagion. When we sing a hymn to the Holy Trinity, like the Trisagion, we should be thinking about the mystery of the Holy Trinity, the fact that the Trinity is indivisible, in three persons, united yet distinct. And I think musically we can see that Azaev is doing this in the use of the motivic idea, the similarity, the unity of these three elements, musical elements, but also the distinctiveness of each musical element through the use of three different zeniths. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's lesson. In our next lesson, we're going to take a look at how composers use these melodies and harmonize them, and how our understanding of melody can aid in our understanding of harmony as well. So until next time, may God, who uses the beauty of this world to draw us closer to Him, bless and keep you all.